You press your trowel into the soil and feel the resistance of compacted earth, the silence of a garden that refuses to wait. You've followed every modern instruction, measured every synthetic drop, and still your tomato seedlings curl inward like they're protecting a secret you're not smart enough to hear. The neighbor's garden explodes with life, while yours looks like it's holding its breath. That gap between what you do and what he gets isn't luck. It's a method that the experts quietly stopped teaching. The 70-year-old gardener doesn't check a soil test kit. He doesn't order pH adjusters online or chase the latest organic certification. Instead, he walks to his compost pile at dawn, digs his bare hand into the dark center, and pulls out a handful of earth that smells like wet stone after a storm. What he knows, and what the university extension programs have systematically ignored, is a technique called Hugel culture. It's an 800-year-old German method that builds living soil from the bottom up using nothing but layered logs and kitchen scraps. The botanists call it inefficient. The old gardener calls it breakfast. The core of the method is almost too simple to believe. You dig a trench roughly 3 feet deep, about the length of your arm from fingertip to shoulder. At the bottom, you lay large logs from oak, apple, birch, or maple. Never use treated wood, cedar, black walnut, or black cherry. Those species contain natural compounds that suppress plant growth instead of feeding it. The old gardener learned this the hard way after burying cedar scraps one spring and watching his pepper plant stop growing for 6 weeks. The soil didn't kill them. It just refused to cooperate. That refusal, that silence from your bed when you've done everything by the book, is a signal the old gardener learned to read the first time his pepper stems went rigid. If you want to start hearing what your soil's actually saying, subscribe right now. This channel keeps digging until the truth comes up. In the comments, write the word cedar if you've ever planted something that just stopped growing for a reason you couldn't see. But here's the trap. If you bury the banana peels whole without cutting them into inch-long strips, they ferment underground and produce a sour alcohol smell that attracts every ant within 50 meters. The old gardener learned this in his second year, when his rose bed turned into a highway of ants carrying fermented fruit back to their nest. He lost 3 bushes before he figured out that the peels needed to be torn, not dropped. The same logic applies to the coffee grounds. If you dump them in a wet clump, they mat together, block airflow, and create an anaerobic pocket that smells like rotten eggs. The soil suffocates. The roots drown. If the way that rotten smell hits your nose feels familiar, stay with me.
I've found
This
what
is
we
where
were
the real
looking
trick
for.
starts.
It
The
was
secret
here the
is
whole
layering,
time.
not mixing. Each layer has a job. The logs at the bottom act like a sponge, soaking up water during rain and releasing it slowly during dry spells. This is why you reduce watering by 60 to 70% compared to conventional beds. The logs don't decompose quickly. They stay intact for years, slowly feeding the soil with carbon while holding moisture in reserve. The old gardener calls it the bank account of the garden. You deposit water when it rains, and you withdraw it when the sun beats down. Above the logs, the smaller branches create air pockets. These pockets allow oxygen to reach the deeper layers, feeding the beneficial bacteria that break down organic matter without producing foul smells. If you skip this layer and just pile green waste directly on the logs, the whole bed turns into a stinking swamp within 2 weeks. The old gardener learned this when he was 42, after he got impatient and dumped everything into the trench at once. He said the smell reminded him of the time his basement flooded in 1998. He never made that mistake again. That stink is your soil gasping. and it cost the old gardener a full season to diagnose the missing layer. Subscribe
Layers
so you
upon
can
layers.
build that air pocket before
Restored
you ever
now
inhale that swamp
and
smell.
thriving.
And in the comments, tell me the one gardening mistake you made twice before you finally learned the fix. The green layer, the one with your banana peels and coffee grounds, sits above the air pockets. This is where the rapid decomposition happens, feeding the plants in the first growing season while the logs below slowly release their stored nutrients. And then comes the final layer, 6 to 12 inches of finished compost or the topsoil, the same depth the Roman gardeners used when they dug pits 3 feet deep and filled them with fresh horse manure mixed with straw. The Romans grew lettuce in January. They grew cucumbers in February. They did it without electricity, without plastic, without synthetic anything. Some people hear this and think, it's too much work. You're not that person. You already know the difference between waiting months and waiting hours. What the modern botanists miss is not the chemistry. They understand the decomposition rates perfectly. They can tell you that banana peels break down in 2 weeks when cut into strips, or that eggshells release calcium in 24 hours when powdered. What they miss is the structure. The layered design of the Hugel bed mimics the forest floor, where fallen trees decompose in slow motion, feeding the soil for decades instead of weeks. The forest doesn't till. The forest doesn't add synthetic fertilizers. The forest just works because the layers are correct. The old gardener doesn't use the word Hugel. He calls it the wood pile garden, and he builds one every 3 years. His first bed, built when he was 67, still produces tomatoes in August without any additional watering. He planted it once, fed it with kitchen scraps for 2 seasons, and now the logs underneath have become a living reservoir that never runs dry. His neighbors water every evening. He waters maybe once a week, and only when the top 2 inches of soil feel dry against his knuckle. There's a moment in the technique that most tutorial videos skip. After you've layered the logs, branches, green waste, and soil, you need to water the bed thoroughly, not just the surface, but deeply, until water seeps out the bottom of the trench. This activates the decomposition process. Without this initial deep soak, the logs remain dry and the bacteria stay dormant. The bed sits there for weeks, doing nothing, while you wait for growth that never comes. The old gardener waters his new beds twice in the first week, once at dawn and once at dusk, following the timing prescribed in the ancient Indian Vrikshaya Veda texts that link irrigation to stomatal conductance peaks. By the time you add your first seedlings, the bed is already generating heat. The decomposition of the green layer raises the soil temperature by about 10 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the surrounding ground, which extends your growing season by 10 to 14 days in the spring and again in the fall. The Romans knew this. They built hotbeds with fresh horse manure and straw covered with soil and harvested crops in the dead of winter. The modern gardener uses heating mats and grow lights. The old gardener uses rotten logs and patience. At what point in this video did you realize you've been fighting your soil instead of feeding it? Write it in the comments. I need to know how many of us were taught the same mistake. The failure case, the one that makes most people quit, happens at the end of the first year. After the initial harvest, the bed sinks, the logs compress, the green layer shrinks, the soil level drops by 6 inches or more, and the garden looks like a collapsed cake. Most people look at this and think it failed. They abandon the bed and start over somewhere else. The old gardener smiles when he sees his bed sink. He tops it off with another 6 inches of finished compost and a fresh layer of coffee grounds and crushed eggshells. The sinking is not failure. It's the logs settling into their role as water sponges. That sinking moment, The exact instant most people walk away is when the old gardener knows the bed is finally alive. Subscribe now to stay through the full 3-year arc. Next week, I'm revealing what happens to your harvest when the worm population hits critical mass. In the comments, write the word sponge if you've ever abandoned a bed before it got good. The second year is when the bed becomes self-sustaining. The logs have softened enough to hold water like a soaked towel. The beneficial fungi have woven their networks through the wood, breaking down cellulose into sugars that the plant roots can drink directly. The old gardener doesn't fertilize his second-year beds at all. He just adds his kitchen scraps to the top and lets the worms do the rest. Earthworms love the protected environment under the logs. They multiply rapidly, aerating the soil, processing organic matter, and leaving behind castings that are chemically balanced for plant growth. The third year, the logs start to collapse entirely. This is when the bed reaches maximum fertility. The softened wood releases carbon, nitrogen, and trace minerals in a steady stream. The old gardener harvests his largest yields in the third year, pulling eggplants the size of his forearm and basil bushes that reach his waist. He says the third year is when the garden knows you're serious. The first year is an investment. The second year is a conversation. The third year is a partnership. Now imagine your rose bush 3 days from now, standing tall under that humid morning sun, the earthworm you haven't seen yet, still working its magic underground. The coffee grounds you buried yesterday, already feeding the soil microbes that will feed your plant next week. What the botanists ignore is not a secret. It's a principle. The forest floor builds itself in layers. The old gardener just copies what the forest does naturally. There's no mystery, no ancient wisdom that requires incantations. There's only structure, patience, and the stubborn refusal to believe that a plastic bag of synthetic powder is better than a rotten log in a banana peel. Tomorrow morning, before the sun climbs, take your kitchen scraps and your trowel and find a spot in your garden where nothing has grown well. Dig down 3 feet, lay a log, add your branches, tear your banana peels into strips, sprinkle your powdered eggshells, cover it all with soil. Water it deeply at dawn and again at dusk. Then walk away for a week. Come back and look for the first sign of life. When you see it, you'll understand why the 70-year-old gardener never listens to the botanists. He doesn't need to. His soil speaks for itself. In the next video, we're going deeper into what happens when you combine coffee grounds with crushed egg shells and a specific waste from your kitchen sink that most people pour down the drain. The result will change how you water your garden forever. Subscribe now so you don't miss what comes next.